Well, thank you everyone for joining us. We're currently working through some things, trying to determine if we can take action on anything tonight, with some of our committee members not being present. So I guess let's start with roll call. Anne, if that's okay.
Yep. Okay, so Alexandra,
Here.
Liesl,
Here.
Serena, Sophia, Tayu,
Here.
Veronica,
Here.
Bruce,
Yes.
and Chance.
Present.
All right, and I know we have some things to talk about the agenda. We will be taking public comment before each agenda item, if I'm correct, right, Bruce?
Yes, and I'm also communicating with Garrett now. He says a quorum is 7, but I'm asking him whether we could get the presentation anyway from the planning folks, because they've got 3 people mobilized to join us tonight, and I'd hate to send them off, but he has.
Yeah,
Mayor,
and it looks like Janet is in the attendees. If we could bump her up so she could join us as well.
Thank you, Ann.
and she might be able to answer that question for
That's
us.
true, that she would
So
be.
maybe that's why she raised her hand too.
I guess we'll.
So I will promote these folks, and Alexandra, you can continue on.
Okay. Well, if I'm remembering correctly, our next step would be to approve the agenda, which I know we have some changes that we're making, specifically to the last part about taking public comment about all items on the agenda, because we'll be taking public comment from each item as we go before we discuss. And maybe Janet can speak more to that.
Yes, so your the body is 13, right? You have 13 people on the body.
The total number of people that could be on it, but we have less than that currently on the committee, yes.
Well, there's that many positions. They're not filled maybe, but there's 13 positions. So 7 is quorum. So you cannot hold a meeting unless you have quorum.
Mhm. Yeah.
If you wish to, hear a presentation just as individuals, it's not going to be the ResJ hearing a presentation. It's not going to be part of your agenda. You need a quorum. Can you call somebody? Can you get them here so that you can have a quorum and have a meeting?
I can
Yeah.
message Sophia and see if she's able to jump on.
Okay.
Yeah, it would be especially helpful to let Ben, our planning director, and the people from the MC group they've mobilized to be here, and it would be really nice if we could let them give their presentation to us, but we wouldn't be able to discuss it. Is that right, Janet? If we
Well, it's a presentation being given to individuals, not being given to the ResJ, because the ResJ is not meeting, because the ResJ doesn't have quorum.
So they could do the presentation, but then we would just have to adjourn after that. And
Yeah, it's just individuals listening to a presentation. There are no questions. There's no discussion. It's not ResJ hearing the presentation, because there's no ResJ meeting if there's no quorum. I think you have members. You have just 7 or 8 members, actual bodies in the positions. Is that right?
Yes.
So you could only be one person can be absent until you get more people to fill those positions, because the body was created as a body of 13.
Yeah. Yeah, we ran into this problem with GPAC years ago. We had to change our bylaws in order to allow us to remove members who had not shown up for a long time in order to get back to where we could have a quorum. But the GPAC didn't have any fixed membership number, so it was just who was members at the time.
And this was raised as an issue. I mean, this is always raised as an issue during the creation of a town committee, the ability to have quorum. And
Mhm.
here we are.
Yeah,
Yeah, I know it's unfortunate, but and I'm sorry to be the bearer of bad news, but
mhm.
as I say, I don't write the laws. I just tell you about them. I have to be the messenger.
Yeah, right.
So you have a possibility of 2 people. You might be able to. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah, you have only 2 others. And if you can't get a hold of them,
Shelley, were you going to say something?
Janet, it's Shelley
Yeah,
Hamilton.
right.
You have to, do they just have to come on to establish quorum, but they don't have to stay on for the whole meeting?
No, the moment you lose quorum, you've lost your meeting. So they do need to be here. One of them anyway. 'Cause you've
Veronica,
got
have you
6.
gotten a response from your message? No.
Serena, I texted Serena just to see, and she confirmed that she's got some important things with her family that she's doing, so she can't be here.
Well,
What about the other person? Who is it?
Sophia hasn't responded yet.
Ah. Anybody have a telephone number? Caller?
I don't.
Sorry, Shelley and Ben.
Well, what I would think if this is okay with Janet, what if we were to hear the presentation from Ben and Andy and I think there's one more person that's going to be joining us from the EMC group, and we would not be able to discuss that presentation. We would just hear it. But Janet, would we be able to get public input on that presentation, or would we just wait until the next time when we presumably would then discuss it?
Right, you're just a group of individual people listening to a presentation. It's not the Res J hearing, so there's no public input, there's no questioning, there's no
Mhm.
anything that we would have at a normal meeting. That you're just a group of individuals listening to a presentation. So, and
Okay.
it
Let
can't,
me,
we can't reflect in the record that Res J had this presentation because Res J didn't meet tonight.
right.
It would-
And the next Res J meeting, it would only be those of us who were here who had heard the presentation.
But you would
Um,
have a recording of it.
We can still record it. Ben, can you let
But
us know what you think?
Can I raise another issue there too, which is, and then let Ben go, and I know Lisa has her hand, but the other issue is if we do have questions, then we'd have to invite staff and EMC back to potentially answer questions. So it might make more sense
That's true.
if we can't get quorum to just reschedule that presentation, in my opinion.
Because even us asking questions would be a form of discussion, right, Ben?
Right.
Well,
Work for you if we didn't do this until next month.
Because your records are going to have to reflect that the meeting was not held, the meeting was canceled for lack of a quorum. If you can't get one more member, then that's unfortunately what's going to have to happen.
if I could weigh in,
Yes,
I would prefer to make the presentation tonight. We'd be happy to come back, but I think there are some items that we would like to go over with the committee members who are present tonight, and something for people to ponder until your next meeting in August, I guess, assuming we can't get that extra person here.
mhm.
You could always schedule a special meeting, you could do that.
But does this mean that, so we receive this presentation, we cannot ask questions, and we also, can't discuss it at the next meeting because it was never, we
I
did.
think we could discuss it at the next meeting, but we couldn't discuss it now.
If it's something that's taped and it's available to everybody to look at, it's a presentation that's being given. You're watching a presentation that's taped and available to everybody, but it's not, you're not watching it as Res J, and you're not discussing it as Res J, and you're not asking questions such as Res J. You're just individuals watching a presentation that's being taped. It's available for everybody to watch. And the record will reflect that the Res J meeting was canceled for lack of a quorum, was not held. There was no meeting tonight. Now, if you want to schedule a special meeting, if you can get everybody together at a certain time and place and get commitment from everybody to be together at a certain time, then you can have a special meeting, and you can hear the presentation then, ask the questions at that point in time, or, and I realize that you've got everybody there, but it is Zoom. So people didn't travel to come to one place. So there is that. And I'm sorry to be the bearer of bad news.
That's okay, Janet. And I'm glad you're here, Janet. This is so we can figure this out. Let me just take a poll of the people who are here, if you don't mind, and see whether perhaps a week from today, on the 8th, same time, same channel, would we all be able to be here? And then we could tell you is saying no.
That Bruce is the PIPSA meeting, July 8th.
Right, yes, it is. I didn't have it on my calendar yet. Okay. July 15th. I'm just staying with Thursdays. I mean, anybody want to chime in on what would be a good time? I'm just wondering if we can make sure that at least those of us here could attend the next meeting, then we just have to find one other person to do it, and then we can actually have that meeting. But
I'm curious,
Yeah,
Bruce.
Bruce, just to let you know, I would not be available on the 15th because I have planning commission meetings scheduled on that evening.
yeah, okay.
Curious if it sounded like, from what Janet shared and Ben shared as well, that we could still present tonight, make use of the time that you all have taken to show up, members of the public who are listening, but it's not a meeting. We're just folks listening to a presentation, that if it's recorded, members of the public can review that, and other members of the committee can review that. And then we can discuss it at our next meeting. So it makes this time productive for those of us who are here.
Okay with me.
So quick question, do we need to also not have the presentation from Shelley tonight? So that's one question. And then the second one is, do we have a process? We make sure that we have a quorum before the meeting, so we don't, have this situation again.
We could maybe institute a process like that through Anne or something, to ask everybody to email back in response to the agenda. That might be.
Because I think we really need that, especially with such a small group of people, and we don't want to waste the time of our consultants and others.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. My inclination, this is just me speaking, and I'm probably talking too much, but if Alexandra, if you want to try to answer either of those questions. I mean, my inclination with Shelley would be that there's going to be a lot more discussions and questions about that. So if Shelley, if you could consider doing that when we can have a meeting in which we can actually take action, because we could hear you present and then we just have to say thanks and leave. We can't even ask. Yeah.
Janet, one other quick question. Veronica and Lisa were on the subcommittee for that particular item that I was here tonight.
Mm-hmm.
Well, obviously you're not closing the meeting, but could this be just the subcommittee conversation, a continued subcommittee? Obviously you can't take any action or anything on it, but could it just be the subcommittee? I don't know. in which case you could have.
Well, if you, I mean, I don't know what that would do. The subcommittee is not everybody else too. It's just it's a subcommittee of the ResJ. Is that what it is?
Right, but then first by you chance, but then everybody else would just be considered public attending a subcommittee, maybe?
Yeah,
No public.
but if we all weigh in on it, then that's a violation of the Brown Act on the ResJ. I mean, we can't get together and,
Right.
well, no matter what we call ourselves, we can't get together and as less than a quorum
Right,
of the ResJ and discuss ResJ business, so. Or as a, well, I don't know, yeah.
I'm sorry, it's it's designed so that there can't be secret meetings and all that kind of stuff, but it's, those are the rules, and it is inconvenient when you can't make quorum, but there's a reason for these rules. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
So it's 7:20 and I don't want to hold everyone up.
I think we should go ahead
continuing.
with the presentation with Ben and Andy, and at least.
And if we can, Shelley, I think, she's here, why not? And then maybe
Okay.
us as members just turn off our cameras so that, we can't see the public, they can't see us, and it's same thing. So, we're just here. I mean, Anne, I don't know if you want to take the time to put us all as attendees, but I'm cool with just turning off my camera and listening and taking notes, and we'll try to get back at some other point.
And so whoever takes minutes and whoever keeps the records for this, for ResJ, should show that this meeting was not held. It had to be canceled for lack of a quorum. Presentations, one by Shelley and one by Ben and the consultants, were recorded at this time, and people can watch them. They're available to the public, just like this meeting would have been. And so they can watch the presentation, but it's a pure presentation. There are no questions. There's no discussion. There's no back and forth. It's nothing. It's just like they're giving a presentation that you can watch at your leisure. Okay, sorry.
Okay.
Is that okay, everyone? Can we just get a quick, yeah, cool, okay.
All right. You guys are on and we're going to disappear. Turn off our cameras.
Okay, and well, first of all, we have one other person in attendance who should probably promote, and that's the EMC Planning Group, listed as an attendee. If you could promote Richard, he's that individual there, I believe, unless, is that correct, Andy?
Yes, Richard should be here.
Okay.
I'm not seeing Richard. Well, I did promote the EMC group, but okay.
I can begin otherwise.
Well, okay, so let me just introduce this situation to the group that is here tonight. And first of all, I want to thank you, those who are in attendance. We very much appreciate getting before you individually, because we think this is a very important part of what we're doing. To provide some brief background, and many of you have already heard this, so you don't have to listen too closely, but the town is required by the state to update its housing element every 8 years. And we are currently in the process of what we call the 6th regional housing needs allocation cycle. So what we're going to be doing in completing by the end of 2022 is looking at the town's current housing element and responding to the requirements that have been given to us by the state. And specifically in that regional housing needs allocation, what's commonly referred to as RHNA, the town has been allocated 490 housing units that we are supposed to plan for development in the next 8 years. And of those 490, 304 would qualify as either low or moderate income. So a majority of the housing units, roughly 60%, are supposed to be affordable. And the town has hired ENC Planning Group, who you see the two principal leads on that, Richard James and Andy Flower. And I've been working very closely with them for the last couple of months. I think the last standing town committee that we have not quite, or we haven't met. And both Andy and I and Richard consider this group very important because in addition to hitting those RENA numbers, there's also a requirement to affirmatively further fair housing. And one of the things we're trying really hard to do is involve people in this housing element update. And I should also add that in addition to the housing element, we will be updating the safety element and more than likely certain policies or programs of the land use element. So definitely 2 and possibly 3 general plan elements will be part and parcel of this work. But getting back to who we're trying to reach and who we want to hear from, who we need to hear from, is that we understand that there's a critical housing shortage in Marin and indeed the Bay Area, and in particular for affordable housing. And this is the major challenge we have before us, is to try to find a way to plan for housing for those who aren't fortunate enough to be able to afford to buy a house or are struggling to rent a house, or maybe they can't even afford that here in Marin or in near Fairfax, and to get those people involved and get everybody involved really. But before this group, it's our hope that we can begin the process of reaching out and engaging with people who are often not heard from in this process. So that's kind of the overview of what we're trying to do and how we're hoping that you can partner with us in this effort. And with that, I will turn it over to Andy for his presentation.
Thank you, Ben. Let's see. And thank you for that wonderful lead in. Everybody's going to see some very familiar things from what Ben just walked us through. And for some reason, my PowerPoint doesn't seem to be showing. Oh, there we go. Here we are. Well, thank you, ResJ Committee, for including us in your agenda this evening. Although I understand we are not now having an official meeting, but we appreciate the opportunity to give this presentation nonetheless. I'm glad that I didn't go with my instinct to shorten the presentation because I saw that we had 20 minutes on the agenda. I thought I would just go through this quickly. So today I'll go at a little more leisurely pace and walk through this as thoroughly as possible. So here's our agenda. We'll first go through some understanding of the affirmatively furthering fair housing, which is also known as AB 686. And I'll also talk through the 8 engagement strategy elements, which were included with I don't know if it was a packet or it was maybe just a document that was sent to you. I'll also discuss a little bit about our current status, and we will not have time for Q&A at the end, but we look forward to that at our next meeting. And Richard and Ben, I do want to invite you to step in and please fill any holes you might see in my presentation. That'll help us round out things in lieu of being able to answer questions and having discussion. So as Ben mentioned, Assembly Bill 686, this is one of the biggest changes between the 5th and 6th housing element update cycles. And we're asking ResJ to partner with us to facilitate deliberate action to explicitly address, combat, and relieve disparities resulting from past patterns of segregation. This is a big lift, and it really involves the heart of this housing element update process. We want to build a trusting relationship throughout the community to enable as broad engagement as possible. So with that goal, we want to communicate effectively and respectfully, and we want to regularly share information with a transparent process. We're starting off with an online engagement platform, but we have methods and we welcome other ideas for how we might be able to make sure that we can really get on the ground and engaged with everyone in the community. Oops, excuse me. So here are the here are our 8 parts of our engagement program, and we're going to walk through this one at a time. I include the numbers as we go through, so you'll see where we're at. So number 1, our purpose. We want to make sure that we create an inclusive, transparent, proactive approach for broad participation in the process of updating the housing and safety elements, and as Ben mentioned, also potentially the land use element. And here you can see a spreadsheet with that number 490 as a total for the town of Fairfax, and you can see it in relationship to all the other communities within Marin County. And as Ben mentioned, we've got nearly 50% of these housing numbers are in the very low and low income strata. And I want to make clear that the town is not mandated to build housing to address the needs for all of these income levels, but to make sure that there's the capacity, and more than the capacity, but also that there's a decrease in any constraints that might be present for this housing to get built. And that those constraints could have to do with zoning, it could have to do with fees, things like that. So we'll be looking at all aspects. So through this process, we want to be sure to provide as much opportunity for public interaction and participation as possible. And through this, we'll be discussing potential options for achieving this change. We don't know yet what the change is going to be. We truly want it to come from the community. We are open to the ideas that all members of the community who either and both maybe work and or live here today. We want to optimize zoning strategies that can enable an additional 490 units of housing. And we want to convey that we're all in this together. It may not seem like an easy task, but I know that we've heard from the mayor before, who has said that the 5th cycle housing element seemed impossible, but it ended up with a wonderful outcome with Victory Village. And hopefully we can have something that is equally and proportionally as wonderful become an outcome of this process. So our needs analysis is one of our first steps, which begins with understanding with who lives here now. And ABAG, the Association of Bay Area Governments, has helped to provide some base information, demographic information for us to understand who lives in Fairfax now. And here we can see that over time, the folks have aged in place here in Fairfax. The population has gotten older with time. And that's an important piece of the puzzle as we put together our plan for how to meet the needs for people to continue to live here and for people to feel welcome moving here. You can also see here that that Fairfax population is, again, it's aging in place, and that it is becoming more diverse through the younger generations. So this leads us to questions like, how do we retain and grow diversity here in Fairfax through housing policy?
Yeah,
So,
Andy?
Yeah.
I just wondered if you could flip back to that last slide. This is one of the hopeful trends that we see, where when you get to the age 0 to 17 population, you can see almost 15% of the population is non-Caucasian white. And that's in comparison to the age 65 plus, where it's roughly 94% Caucasian white. So these are things where Fairfax is becoming a more diverse community. And as Andy mentioned, the challenge is how do we deal with issues like affordability and inclusiveness, and continue to make this a community that welcomes and fosters these type of trends.
Thank you, Ben. So this was a graphic that was shared just today by the ILG in their webinar. The vice mayor in Berkeley shared this. I've seen a few different iterations of this concept of equity, as opposed to equal. So the image on the left shows what equal access looks like, and in the middle, what equity might look like, and then all the way to the right, what it can look like when we actually remove the structural barriers in the first place. So I was inspired by that and wanted to share it today. So our tools for getting to a more equitable place starts with shared expectations and assumptions for engagement. So throughout our web page, our online platform, we want to make sure to set the stage and to help folks understand with each step in the process what our goals are for engagement. And we'll get to a little bit more about what that means. But first, I just want to give you a quick snapshot of our schedule. You can see that we're walking into the safety element right now, and Richard's done a lot of heavy lifting around that. Next, we'll get to site options, and that's sort of the biggest piece of the puzzle here, and probably the place where we want as much interaction as possible. And here we have a few questions that we want to share with you. These are some of the questions that we aim to answer, and we also would love to hear some of your ideas around it. How do we create opportunities for meaningful participation? And how do we inspire the community to design for the future of Fairfax? Our engagement process is intended to involve conversational loops so that we don't just have a linear process where we as experts in another room create a document and we put it out to the public, receive comment, and then just provide a report. We're truly wanting to engage in a meaningful way so that we consult with the public and with a broad diversity of public throughout each iterative step, so we can learn from the community who are the experts in your environment, and we bring back what we then discover with that information, and that iterative process leads to a final report. Final report is important. It's beyond just a report. This is the aspirational goals for your community, like all general plan elements are. But here we're touching on several different elements at once. So it's we're glad to be working with this community and finding that vision together. This is a graphic that shows the levels of engagement, how they grow and change throughout the process. Right now, we're in the beginning steps of our website platform. We've got a lot of information for folks to learn about. We also are wanting to learn information from the community. So we have some things like surveys and polls. We have a photo contest. We have a mapping exercise. We really want to learn from the Indigenous folks who live in the community right now, because there's a wealth of knowledge and experience that will inform our direction. So we've begun with a number of committees and stakeholder groups, and we'd love to know from you if we're missing any groups, if there's any groups that you can imagine, and we're certainly open to our list growing along the way. We'll also be holding some workshops, some online workshops, possibly some in-person ones. We'll see. We'll be in the library, maybe even on a regular basis in the period of time where we're asking for a lot of insight and input. And we'll be at the farmers market, and we'll be working with all of the grocery stores and spreading the word about the website and how folks can get involved. But we'd love to know from you as allies, allies and members of the ResJ committee. Can you help us understand what barriers might need to be overcome to reach the broadest number of people and to be as inclusive as possible? So of all the information that can help someone to participate in this process, I want to declare that experience living or working in the community is really the most important piece of information that somebody would need to have to use our website or our surveys, and we plan on having some in paper form as well, so that when we go to the food pantry, we'll be able to translate answers into the platform so that they can become part of the final reporting out of the engagement experience. But we also do make all of these other things available, and we try to make them available in the most in a way that is as easy to read and as inviting as possible. So how can we identify risks and plan for them? Being on an online platform, we've all seen some uncomfortable situations, maybe comment forums that you'd rather not be a part of or wish you hadn't taken a peek at. And I want to stress that our partner in technology is moderating, and we are managing the site on a regular basis so that we can create a safe space for people to learn and participate and grow with the project over time. We also we can also create private forums for groups such as renters to feel more comfortable. So along the way, we'll be setting the context and the expectations for each step in the process. We'll also be setting clear ground rules, both in our website and at any in-person workshops that we might have.
And Andy, if I could interject,
Please.
One of the things we're doing with this is we all know the benefits of face-to-face public meetings. But what we can do with an online forum is reach out to different groups, encourage them to break up into subgroups based on their common interests. And that way, we maybe can have an opportunity to hear from those people in a meaningful way that oftentimes doesn't come up in a public hearing. I mean, we've all been to town council meetings, they last an average of 5 hours. And if you're one of the people that's struggling to make ends meet, you're often too exhausted to sit through a 5-hour meeting. So these are the things where with an online platform, for example, and or some of these other surveys that we're going to be doing, we will try to meet people halfway in a context that they are comfortable with, that works for them.
Well said, Ben. Absolutely. So we've begun with our website. We've got some places where folks can come into a very open environment, and in those places we are having very light topics. For instance, take a photo and help us understand what makes Fairfax feel like home to you, and we're turning that into a photo contest. We want folks to start to use our tools and to get comfortable with them, so that as we move into subjects that might be a little more controversial or compelling or difficult for any reason, that the tool itself doesn't become a barrier. So we're hoping that we get a lot of participation and a lot of knowledge, honestly, to understand better how folks feel about their own community. We also have a mapping exercise, and that's important because we want folks to see or to see themselves in this map, and to help us understand what are the most favorite places in Fairfax, so that as we get into the place in the process where we're talking about site options for where future housing might go, we can understand the context better in ways that is different than just understanding the zoning, but understanding the community's feelings about different sites. And forums, as I mentioned a little bit ago, we do have the ability to create private forums, and we're excited about this as a tool, because as we learn in some of our equity focused webinars, it's very important for folks to feel safe when they're sharing their experiences. And we're hoping to be able to understand people's stories as we move forward and incorporate that into the housing element. It's one thing to have the data, and it's another thing to understand how it connects to people's lives and what are the aspirations, the ambitions, and what are the constraints for folks who are looking to live or continue living in the town of Fairfax. So we'll be using a combination of tools and trying to cater them to what questions we're trying to answer and to make them as user-friendly as possible as we go through the process. So we'll be reporting back also, and that's an important piece of the trust building. We want to make sure that anybody who's taking the time to share with us a story or to communicate and be part of a forum, and those forums can even over time possibly become in-person forums. And we want to make sure that people can along the way see themselves reflected back in our reporting and in all of our activities that then feed into the progress and the decisions that get made. So our Fairfax Speaks website is launched, and now we're ready to launch the promotional piece of it. So we've got a street banner designed and in the hopper, so to speak, and we've been reaching out to all committees and commissions, and we're thrilled to be here with you tonight. We're also looking to work with the Independent Journal, and we're creating postcards. And Ben, what I didn't include in here is your great idea of bookmarks. And when I mentioned that to my graphics person, he said, "Oh, I thought you meant bookmarks in a website or in a in a search tool." But no, since we're going to be in the library and working with older people, we'll also be sharing with them and anyone who comes into the library. The youth hopefully will be coming back to the library. It is such a community center in many ways, and we're going to make sure that anyone who wants to interact with the webpage will have that ability there at the library, and they can bring home a bookmark with a QR code to help them get right back to that webpage and learn more and help us learn more from them. But we'd love to hear from you also. What are we missing as we share with you some of our promotional ideas? Of course, we won't be able to hear that today, but I am curious if that might be something, Ben, that they could individually email you ideas. I don't know.
Absolutely. Yeah, I hope I do hear back from individual members. And that's something that, as Andy said, is absolutely critical to our efforts going forward. Is we know that there's a lot of information out there that we have either only limited knowledge about or don't have any idea. And especially when we're dealing with groups that typically aren't participating in these type of planning centric processes. So that's where any suggestions that this group can bring to help us break down barriers to reach people, to encourage their participation. One of the things that Andy didn't mention is we're actually hoping to have some kind of prizes or other ways to assist participation. We're not just simply saying, hey, give us your time and get nothing back. That we're trying to, in cooperation with the Chamber of Commerce, come up with some, I don't know what we would call it, Andy, rewards or something, but just to recognize that, especially when we're dealing with people who, again, have a really tough time just making ends meet, that we're not just assuming that they're going to give us their time, that we're saying, hey, we value your participation, your time, your effort, and we want to give you something that acknowledges the effort that takes. So we're working on that, and we'll have that shortly.
One word that we'd like to share is the idea of compensation for folks' time. Yeah. So this is a quick snapshot of our webpage. We hope you'll visit, and we hope you'll share this with as many people as possible.
Andy, the specific website is fairfaxspeaks.com, no space. I think if you just go to Google and type in Fairfax Speaks, you can probably get there, but you'll definitely get there if it's fairfaxspeaks.com. And it's
Maybe-
live right now.
And maybe, Ben, you could share an email that just gives a live link so that they can,
Sure.
if possible. This is the homepage, and it shows just a quick snapshot again of the different places that the website can take you. We've got a project page that's there to help folks understand what the housing element is and what the next steps will be like. And we have a quick survey, and there we have the Fairfaxian space, and that's the mapping exercise. And here's the photo contest, only in Fairfax. So as I mentioned before, Richard is working hard on the safety element update right now, and that's going to help us. That's going to help inform what sites we might see as options going forward. And then we'll have a draft housing element, which may also then inform the safety element again. And so this is an iterative process. And the next time that you'll see our faces, probably presenting to a committee or commission, will be Richard sharing some of the ideas about the safety element. Richard, did you want to give a sneak preview of anything in particular that you're working on around that, or the communities that or experts that you're working on to make this thorough? Oh, we've got you muted somehow.
Yeah, there we go.
Great.
Okay. Yeah, one thing that came up regarding the safety element is evacuation during an emergency situation like a wildfire, where you may have people who with limited mobility, older adults and such, who don't have that capacity to get themselves out of danger, and how we deal with that. I think that's one item that probably most relates to the ResJ. But, we're looking at flooding, fire, really the same four pieces that are in the safety element right now. So it's flooding, fire, earthquake, and then preparedness. But we want to make sure, that in addition to just addressing safety in general, make sure we're inclusive of any special needs regarding safety.
Thank you, Richard. And just as our last page here on the presentation, we encourage you as committee members to, when you're talking with the public and folks are asking about the housing element, that you help focus the discussion on outcomes rather than quantities. That there's a lot of positives that this housing element update will bring to your community, and change is always hard, and especially coming out of the traumatic change that we've all endured with COVID in each of us our own way. So it's a sensitive topic, if for no other reason. Even when change is good, it still can be a stressor. But we encourage you to focus on the outcomes that we hope will come out of this housing element update, and that's a more inclusive opportunity for people to be housed in the town of Fairfax and to remain housed as well. So my next slide is about questions and ideas. We won't be doing that tonight. So Ben, if you'd like to add anything.
Just to repeat that, what Andy mentioned is that you're welcome to email me. And you can also see some contact information on the website if that's convenient and works well for you. That we want people to start communicating however makes sense for them as soon as possible and as much as possible. We need to hear from you to have a successful housing element. So feel free to drop me a line, and I will forward it to Andy and Richard, and we'll keep this ball rolling forward. And like you said, Andy, this is normally where we ask for questions, but I guess tonight we're just making our presentation and hoping for feedback from individuals as we, in the next days and weeks.
Great.
And we thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for presenting. Very exciting stuff. And so I think now our next presentation will be from Shelley if she's ready. And then we will be done with the meeting or the presentations.
The not meeting.
Cute. Okay, Shelley, you ready to go?
Yeah, I guess I'm ready to go. I didn't plan a formal presentation, but I'm happy to just give, because I thought it was going to be a little bit more of a discussional format, but I will do my best.
I believe I have the document that you sent. Do you want me to pull that up on the screen, or?
Do you have the, there was two documents. One was a Word document and one was that document sent to anyone?
Yes, the documents there, I believe it was the general plan, and then there was the, you kind of had a narrative.
Yeah. There was a narrative, there was an Excel table and the general plan.
Okay, I don't know if I have the Excel table.
Okay, so am I allowed to share screen?
Sure, yeah.
I can share that because the general plan is just another way of looking at the Excel table.
Okay.
So
great.
I guess I was just going to start with a little bit of an introduction of who I am and why I'm here presenting. I know several of the people who were on the ResJ committee from a variety of work. I was on the Planning Commission. Hold on a second. I was on the Planning Commission from 2010 to 2030. No, 2030. I was a member of the Planning Commission for, I think, about 9 years during the era when we approved the very first general plan and finalized it with the first housing element for the town of Fairfax after many, many years of conversation. So this is really, I really appreciate and feel honored to be able to make this presentation right after the last presentation and to be kind of coming back into the process after a bit of a hiatus, and to see how much has changed and to see this presentation and to see the process going forward. So this has been really helpful to hear the presentation that was just made. I guess re-engage in this process a number of years ago. So I was on the planning, just a little bit more background. I was on the Planning Commission. I now work in educational equity and work in the area of collaborative approaches and collective impact around closing education equity gaps in Marin County with all of the school districts and the nonprofits in the county, and working with our school district here in Fairfax and San Anselmo. Personally, I'm connected to this subject because in doing some of the work that I've done with educational equity and anti-racism work and working with or doing processes with courageous conversations and epic education, and having read The Color of Law, the book Color of Law, to really understand the history of land use policy and how racism and institutional racism, the history of institutional racism, I began to start thinking about myself personally and thought about how, and in reflecting on the presentation that was just made, I really feel like there's an opportunity to bookend this great work that's being done to update the housing element on one side with a increased awareness as we go into this process of the history of land use laws and the history of housing and how it intersects with equity and justice and specifically systemic racism. And then on the other side, bookending it with opportunities to have personal reflection and personal awareness. So with respect to that part of it, My personal reflection and awareness that started me down the path where I'm in front of you today is realizing that as part of the town's planning commission, I was part of a group of people who passed the first, as I said, the general plan element. And in learning more about the history of land use, came to realize that the term neighborhood character, character of our community, and where that came from in the beginning of land use policy as a way of skirting and getting around the Fair Housing Act that made it illegal to discriminate in housing. And so that term was created to provide a way to perpetuate and continue the discrimination in a much more kind of under the radar. So when I started thinking about that, I realized, wow, okay, I'm part of the problem. I'm part of a group of people who had unconscious bias and unawareness about that term and where it came from, and promoted the approval of a general plan that had that language in it. So what do I do? One of the racial equity protocols that I had apply in some of the education spaces, the recognize, interrupt, and repair protocol. And so in recognizing my participation in where we are today, I stopped and thought about how do we go about interrupting it and then repairing it. So that's where I decided, okay, I'm going to say something. I'm going to raise my hand. I'm going to own my white privilege, having been on the planning commission, which was for many years an all-white planning commission, and interrupt it by speaking up, and then see how I can participate in repairing that. So that's my personal, and then there's a lot of other personal elements to it where I started looking into how did I end up being able to be in Fairfax? How did I end up being able to own my house in Fairfax, and realizing that I am definitely a beneficiary of generational wealth transfer. Not a huge amount, but definitely enough to be here. So doing a lot of that personal reflection. As I mentioned, I think that we have an opportunity in this round of amending our general plan and housing element and safety element to bookend that planning work, which is super important. And I was so excited to see how it's being done, with an awareness, a historical awareness on one side and a personal awareness on the other. And perhaps the Res-J could be the place to host those bookend conversations while the consultants are working on the middle part of it. So part of the, just looking at my notes here, part of the idea of interrupting it was to, like I said, raise my hand and take another look at the general plan that I had participated in creating. And in doing so, and from the history that I learned, I realized there's two things going on that I recognize. There's probably many more things going on, but the two things that came to my attention were the issues of exclusionary zoning. And I think that the consultants before me touched on this in terms of thinking about some of the barriers to affordable housing. What are those barriers? And a word, that comes in terms of land use zoning is the exclusionary zoning. So what kind of zoning policies, practices, programs are there that intentionally or unintentionally exclude people from being able to live in this community? That's one big subject. But in another way, this term of character of our community or neighborhood character comes up a lot in these conversations. And now that I know where that phrase comes from, I don't want to use it anymore. And I invite us as a community to think about replacing that term with specifically what we mean. So are we talking about the scope and scale of the built environment? Is that the character that we're talking about? Are we talking about the look and feel of the facade of buildings? Is that the character that we're talking about? So on a personal basis, to stop and before we get into this new housing element, if community members go on a walk and, you know, have some time to do some personal reflection about what it is that you love about your neighborhood. So rather than just saying, oh, I love the character of my neighborhood, maybe not knowing where that phrase came from, spend some time thinking about specifically, what do I love about my neighborhood? Do I love the way that it smells, the way that the houses look, the width of the streets, the trees and the views, the sound of the children in the Little League people playing around the corner? What is it that I love about my community? And be very concrete and specific about that so that we can use that language in our general plan to express what we love about our community, rather than the phrase character of our community or my neighborhood character, which has its historical basis in structural racism and discrimination. So that's what I, originally came to the subcommittee of the ResJ to talk about. And then in terms of doing something about it, because I'm a big fan of not just raising your hand and complaining, that you're going to raise your hand and say if something should be changed, then add a proactive action commitment to that. So I made an action commitment to say, okay, I was on the Planning Commission for 9 years. I'm very aware of how the general plan is structured. And I went back and I offered to go through the entire general plan with a find and replace on a PDF document, and searched for all of the instances in our document that had the word character or neighborhood character. And again, this is not changing policy. This is not materially changing the meaning or purpose. Like I said, it doesn't change any of the policies, the programs, the principles, or the practices in our general plan. It's simply looking at the instances in which that term is used in our general plan and replacing it, like I said, with very specific words that capture the meaning of the paragraph or the section in which those words are used, so that we are not perpetuating that phrase in our general plan. So I guess I will share screen. Let me hold on a second. Let me go ahead and I'll just give you an example so that you can see what this is. And as I said, again, this is very different from the work that that is going forward with the housing element, which will involve changing policy, could involve changing policies, definitely setting programs, things like that. This is not a material change to the general plan. So this could happen as a conversation and something that gets approved by the town council before going into the work on the housing element, by way of engaging the community in conversations around the history of land use planning generally. And then this is a way of helping to, again, start thinking deeply about ways in which land use and housing elements can be articulated without using the term neighborhood character. So for example, this is the table that I put together. It shows, here's the page along one side. And can you see this? I want to make sure before I start talking, everyone can see this. Okay, great. Okay. So the way that this is just organized is that this is the page in the general plan where the term is found. This is the section in the general plan. So the executive summary, the introduction, LU means land use, C means conservation, H is the housing, TC is town center, CON is conservation. So the term neighborhood character shows up throughout the document, not just in the housing sections. But for example, I'm just going to go through a couple of examples. So then this column here is, I went through and offered some of my own ideas around some possible alternatives. Column D shows here's the actual text that's in the general plan that where, for example, the word here, it says preserve the character of the downtown area. So again, the idea is to be more specific. You could say preserve the visual business look and feel of the downtown area. That's what that paragraph talks about. So just say what it talks about. There's here's an example where it says for maintaining the character of the town, regardless of future events, for instance, blah, blah, blah. Instead of saying maintaining just this idea of general character of the town, which is open to bias and subjective interpretation as to what that character looks like. And again, as we saw in the previous presentation about the racial composition of our community, I don't believe that we're talking about maintaining the white character of our town, but that is where that term historically came from and was meant to be a nudge, nudge, wink, wink way of saying that. So for example, instead of saying maintaining the character of the town, we could say something like maintaining the town's distinct land use characteristics. There are some instances where it's already described with an adjective like the village-like character, the historical character, the rural character, the small town character. Those are all different than just general character or neighborhood character because they give a very clear description of what kind of character you're talking about. So a couple of other examples are, instead of saying, I think in this land use element in the title section, there's a phrase that says community and neighborhood character, general. Instead, you could say preserve the human-centered scale and sense of community. Again, the general plan is around, and especially like land use is around the land, not the people who are on the land, or to be a way of dictating what the families who are living in the houses should look like. It's meant to describe the use of the way that we as a community collectively want to create buildings. And it's our civic contract, really, of how we want to live together in community. The noise element, how we want to live together and how loud our community is, or how loud this neighborhood is, or things like that. So again, here's another example. Preserve the town character as they know it. Could say instead, seeking instead to preserve the town's human-centric development pattern. That was a phrase that I pulled out. So I read the whole paragraph where the instance was presented, where this little sentence here was presented for the quote for maintaining the character of the town. I read the whole paragraph and then have suggested an alternate phrase that just reiterates exactly what that paragraph says. Again, it's not meant to be a material change. It doesn't change the intent of that paragraph. It simply clarifies it and gives it more specificity. Again, here's another one. Instead of just saying character, the neighborhood character, and in this section here where it says D26, right now, it just says neighborhood character or vehicle circulation. Well, you could say residential character or building character. Scope, scale, and design aesthetic could be another phrase that replaces character. Historic nature of blah, blah, blah. That would be another possible replacement. Design aesthetic, the natural environmental character, the physical character, the scope and scale, pedestrian nature of, the quiet residential atmosphere and visual aesthetic, something like that again. So it's really clearly that when the word character is used in a particular paragraph, it's meant to articulate the built environment or the natural environment, what's unique now as we get out of our houses off of not the virtual environment, but the actual lived environment, the place that we live in. What does that look like? What do you see? What do you hear? How big are the houses? How far are they set back from the road? how much open space is around a house, how much trees are there or not. So really kind of challenging us to be specific about that in the next, either in replacing the phrases for the character phrases that are currently in the entire general plan before having to wait all the way until 2022, 23 to make those amendments, or integrating it into that process. Again, it's a very different, I feel like it's a very different conversation because the planning process for the new housing element and land use element and safety element is a much deeper process and does involve making policy changes, whereas this process could involve having those conversations around the history of land use, the history of land use planning and the history of discrimination in housing, but the proposal is not in any way materially changing the general plan. It's just replacing the word character, the general word character or neighborhood character with specific words that mean exactly what that paragraph means. So I look forward to coming back since we can't have a conversation about this. And having a conversation about this. And in the meantime, anybody who's watching this, I just wanted to throw out again, for me, this started from a very personal place. And I think that planning is both kind of intellectual, but it's also very personal. And so spending some time as a community or as individuals or families, really thinking personally about our own personal story of how we came to be in Fairfax, what we love about Fairfax, what we love about our neighborhood. How were we able to afford to live here? What is our family history with that? How were we treated when we first moved here? And how might that be different than the way other people might be treated when they move here? And take some time to go out into our community as we emerge out of this last year in COVID. And as you walk your dog, meet up at the coffee shop, spend some time looking at our town with new eyes and new lenses, and trying to think from as many different perspectives as possible. So thank you. Look forward to coming back.
Can you stop the share?
Oh, yes.
Yeah. Okay, great. Well, I think that concludes the presentations. Thanks so much, Shelley, Bert, Andy, Richard, for coming. And this will be posted on the website under ResJ, but it's just a general presentation meeting. So see everyone later.
Thank you guys. It was nice to meet you.
You too, Shelley.
And I really do look forward to taking you up on your invitation to stay involved and share what I know from the last time we did this. So thanks, guys.
Please.
Thank you, Shelley.
Everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks, Ann.
Okay, you're welcome.
See you all next time.
Okay, bye-bye.